X1, the Isle of Dread, is the classic wilderness hex crawl that sold nearly 1 million copies in the 1980s as it was bundled in the D&D Basic Expert set. However, I never played this one back then, not all the way through at least, and so it's been sitting on my D&D bucket list. I've got a chance to run it in an upcoming campaign, and today we're going to talk about how to make it better. The thing is, the Isle of Dread is beloved, but a little bit controversial. The plot hook, by modern standards, it's a bit thin. And the adventure itself, it's really bare bones, and a lot of the encounters feel like someone just dumped a bunch of random stuff into the wilderness. On the other hand, it has great potential. There's these cool cinematic themes, like a long ocean voyage to find a lost world setting. You've got pirates, ancient ruins with a lurking evil, basically Jurassic Park and Indiana Jones and Pirates of the Caribbean all thrown together. So you got to be able to do something good with it. Quick note though, this is also my second Isle of Dread video. My last one, it was all about how to convert the Isle of Dread mechanically to run with ShadowDark. I covered things like rules for ships and converting the monsters. Put a link to that one at the end of this video. Today is looking at the story itself, like the content and the structure of the adventure and what we can do to make it better. Ultimately, I want to set us up so that we can turn the Isle of Dread into a meaningful basis for a big chunk of your campaign's mid-game. First, timeout, spoiler warning. I'm going to deal with some of the secrets in the Isle of Dread. If you're a player, you may want to skip this one, especially if you're part of my Sunday night game. This is a video to get out. The module starts with the players finding an account from a pirate from like 30 years ago. This acts kind of like a treasure map. They get a ship and they go on this long ocean voyage across the Sea of Dread to the Nigiath archipelago, and they find the Isle of Dread. Once they're on the island, they're probably going to land in the southern peninsula where some native villages are. They'll traverse the southern island, they'll reach the central plateau, and that's where they could potentially find the ancient ruins. So that's the course of the adventure. Take a look at this map. I've color-coded a couple zones. This is one of the first problems we'll notice with the Isle of Dread. The blue zone, that's where giant prehistoric beasts and megafauna live. And then the red zone is where all the dinosaurs are. So if the players follow the default plot hook and they do the bare minimum while they're at the Isle of Dread, they could go to the central ruin and back and never run into a T-Rex. And that's why we're here. So one of the problems we'll talk about with embellishing the Isle of Dread is what can we do to get the players over the mountains where they can either ride dinosaurs or run away from them. Let's start with the plot hook, though. The default plot hook for the Isle of Dread is the players find this account from a pirate. It was written 30 years ago. He talks about getting blown off course across the Sea of Dread. They discover this lost world. They meet some natives, and as they're talking to them, they hear stories that in the center of the island is a lost city filled with treasure. Rory Barbarossa, the pirate, he's super excited about this, but he needs more people, so he's going to return to the capital city and launch a fresh expedition. And my players have that right now. The adventure they're currently on, they found this almost like a treasure map. And as they're talking about it with each other, they're like, is this really enough of a reason why we would abandon everything we're currently doing, go through the hardship and rigor of trying to get a ship and potentially dying on a transoceanic voyage for a ruined city that may or may not exist? And I guess they've got a point. Like when I was 11, when this came out, or 12, it'd be like dinosaurs, possible treasure. Yeah, let's go. But I do think more serious groups are going to want maybe some more human realism in terms of the plot hook. And I think there's a few ways we can incorporate that. First, here's a look at Karameikos, and the colors are sort of political factions or political alliances. So the Isle of Dread is part of the known world, and players in theory start in the Grand Duchy of Karameikos in the city of Specularum. The Duke took over Karameikos 30 years ago and started putting his loyalists in key positions of power across the land. That's represented by all the purple circles. And the people who were in charge of this land previously, the Traladarans, they've been pushed aside and marginalized. There's a few Traladaran lords that still have villages or holdings. Those are the red ones. Many of the Traladarans are the powerful merchant families that try to oppose the Duke economically. Overall, one of the things I like about Karameikos, it feels a bit like the Norman conquest, where the Karameikans are, or the Thyacians are Normans, and the Traladaran people are the Anglo-Saxons who are left behind. And so there's a lot of like both overt and covert jockeying for power. So both these factions within Karameikos would have tremendous amount of interest in discovering a new place where there might be mineral wealth or other kinds of things that they could exploit. Or if there's people there, establishing maybe a treaty or a trading post or an outpost and trying to improve their economic power within Karameikos. If you zoom out a level, there's the possibility for international intrigue as well. Karameikos is the green nation on this map. They are now like frenemies with the Empire of Thyatis and then Thyatis' ally, the Minrathad guilds, who are purple. The Blue Nation Kingdom of Irendi is neutral, but they're also a maritime power. And all three of these little blocks have spies in the ports of the other nations. They have ambassadors in the capital. If any of them hear about an expedition to a supposedly new place, chances are there's going to be copycats or another expeditionary force launched within a couple weeks. And so you start to recognize that the existence of this island could lead to the players being sponsored either by the government or a powerful merchant family that wants them to go and establish an outpost, negotiate a treaty, open up trade. Maybe some specialists get sent on board their ship, an ambassador or a diplomat or something like that. Oh yeah, here's a letter, like a get out of jail free card, a letter of marque that says if you see any of our rivals on the high seas, it's okay if they don't make it home. And so the players get to act as privateers as well. So it brings in a real Age of Sail quality to your Isle of Dread ocean voyage portion. I did have to think about the Sea of Dread a bit. That's this blue area on the map. Like, why haven't these nations crossed it before? Like, why now? And I tend, at least for my campaign, this is how I'm going to view it. They've all been embroiled in different conflicts until recently. Maybe the past decade, things have calmed down and been peaceful. And so these nations that were focused on dealing with internal issues are now able to look externally and do things like look out at distant lands and start exploration, stuff like that. So it's kind of like the zeitgeist in the known world at this time is where Karameikos, Thyatos, Minrathad, etc. are starting to think about sending people on long-range explorations. And the other thing I think is there's probably some really big monsters in the Sea of Dread. There's got to be a kraken out there and the dragon turtle, things that would generate stories that old-time mariners would say, oh, you can't cross the Sea of Dread. The dragon turtle will get you. And maybe those things are still there and it becomes the player's problem. But that's why the Sea of Dread hasn't been sort of fully explored to date, other than maybe pirates and people who exist outside of normal mercantile ventures. The next thing to talk about, the factions on the island. There's 4 that we're going to talk about. A 5th we'll get to, the secret faction, in a little bit. But we'll cover each of these in turn. The first, the green one, the Tanaroa People, they are the inhabitants of the peninsula below the wall, so they're safe from all the giant prehistoric beasts. We learn a little bit about their culture in the module. They're matriarchal. They've got warriors that are organized into different clans, like animal totem clans. They all take turns manning the wall or sending warriors to help defend against the big beasts on the main part of the island. But one of the most interesting things that they have going on is they have zombie people. So every village has a zombie cult, almost like a mystery cult led by a zombie master. And they turn corpses into zombies that they put to work doing like physical labor. I'm imagining zombies with machetes, like chopping back the jungle and cutting vines and stuff. So all the really heavy physical labor, they kind of have this zombie workforce. Okay, that's a little dark. But it also means that they potentially have access to cash crops and a kind of agriculture that would make them really interesting to trade with. If you think about Caribbean cultures or, the South Pacific or stuff, maybe there's things like they raise coconuts or pineapples, or keeping with the pirate theme, sugar cane. In fact, that's probably really interesting. The people of Tanaroa have access to sugar, something completely unknown on the mainland, and that's going to be worth its weight in gold, and can be used to make rum too, kind of reinforcing our pirate themes. Yarg. Yeah, so I think the Tanaroa people will be interesting also because they've been preyed on by pirates. This gives them a reason to maybe cut a deal with the players and send the players hunting. Both pirates around the Thanigioth archipelago. Well, I guess they'd start by hunting pirates around the Isle of Dread and possibly elsewhere in the archipelago too. I haven't created it yet, but I imagine that there's got to be like a Tortuga or some kind of a pirate haven out there. And I'm sure that there's some quality third-party products that have done a good job of creating like a little pirate base that you can just transplant wherever you want. The next faction to talk about, the Rakasta. So Rakasta are a Mystaran-specific fantasy species. They're basically cat people. They're like what the Khajiit were in Skyrim just 30 or 40 years earlier. They're nomads. They have these giant tents, silk carpets and incense and fine crafts goods made out of wood and silver and stuff like that. And there's absolutely no explanation for why they've chosen to camp out in the middle of the Isle of Dread. Good luck, Game Master. You're on your own. They get well established later on in Mystara lore. For me, I think this is going to be a religious group. They've got a lot of warriors to protect like some venerable old priests, and they're here to try to answer some critical fact about their faith. So I'm going to dip into some Mystara lore here because I've have a lot of history with this campaign setting. One of the primordial deities in Mystara is this being, Ka the Preserver, and Ka actually looks like a dinosaur. Mystara has a hollow world, and when species go extinct or when civilizations fall, the relevant deities can transplant them into the hollow world. So the hollow world is like this museum of past civilizations, all still existing inside the crust of the planet. And Ka has transplanted all the dinosaurs before they went extinct, except we know that the north part of this island is a dinosaur preserve. So maybe there's a giant temple to Ka somewhere in the northern part of the island. Ka would have records, or maybe the temple has writings about the origins of all the different deities, including the origins of the cat deity, Bastet. And so the Rakasta are here to find the primordial temple and see if they can finally put to bed this religious question that's causing a schism amongst the Rakasta priesthoods or priestesses regarding the origin of Bast. And so the players, if they partner with the Rakasta, now have a reason to go north of the wall and help explore dinosaur lands. The Rakasta have a lot of valuables in terms of trade goods, and probably like the thing that would motivate my players the most. I am super stingy about ancestries or races and classes. Like if I could limit a campaign to be just like dwarf, human, elf, core 4 classes would work for me. And usually I only let us expand to other races and classes if the players have a good reason. Like if they go to a desert setting, okay, guess what? Now you can have a desert rider character class. Or, if they go up to the Norse area, someone could be a Norse character class. So I think by partnering with the Rakasta, I can say, all right, if someone wants to make a cat person now, go nuts. That's probably enough to motivate at least one or two of my players to be like, yeah, we got to partner with the Rakasta. I want to be a cat person someday. The next species or faction to take a look at are the Phanatons. This is another created for the Isle of Dread race. They look like lemurs, except they've got big heads, big eyes, big ears. They live up in the trees. They're an arboreal species, build huts and rope walkways and things. I'm going to go full Ewok with the Phanaton. Like they're up there banging their drums and doing crazy dancing stuff around fires, like Phanatton style. And their issue is that every carnivorous species out there thinks that Phanatton tastes like chicken. So they're tired of the Rakasta wanting to make Phanatton nuggets, or the lizard people want to have like McPhanaton burgers, or the Aranea we're going to talk about them in a second. They want to slurp Phanatton shakes. The Phanatton are like, they just want to be left alone, and they want to know that all these other folks will stop hunting them. And then what they can offer the player characters, assume my players even run into them, because they can freely travel through the treetops, they actually get all over the island and they know where everything is. So they know where to find like the primordial temple of Ka, for instance. Just tell the cat people to stop hunting us. So speaking of a faction that says Phanatton tastes like chicken, that brings us to the Aranea. The Aranea are these gruesome giant spiders. They've got big brains and they can do magic. They're basically like emotionless arcane scientists that probably think everyone they meet is on the menu. So they're pretty creepy. I imagine the Aranea, I'm going to play them like it's like entering Mirkwood with webs, and the webs block all the sunlight, so it's dark and gloomy. They've got these bugbear servants that live on the ground, although I'm going to replace them with ettercaps because spider people are kind of more on theme. And because the Aranea do magic, most of them can do like phantasmal forces and ventriloquism. So I imagine an encounter with them is very disoriented. You don't know really what's going on. And like I said, you don't know if you're on the menu or not. So they'll be kind of the creepy faction. But because they are scientists, they need stuff. They need stuff for their experiments. They need specimens. They need material components and samples. And of course, a lot of the stuff they need, it's going to be north of the mountains, like rare lotus petals that only grow in the dinosaur swamp, things like that. So, and the Aranea have all these magic items that they can't use. Like one of them has a broom of flying. I can't picture a giant spider flying around on a broom, a teeny little broom, giant spider. So I imagine that they'll offer some of that stuff in trade to the players in return for players being willing to do missions. Of course, the Aranea wouldn't be upset if the players wouldn't mind kidnapping some Phanatons for them. They taste like chicken. Or maybe grabbing a Rakasta or two. They haven't eaten a cat person before. That's the kind of thing maybe a giant spider would want to do. I don't see my players actually doing that. In fact, if they have Fireball, by the time that they meet the Aranea, I imagine that'll be like hostile negotiations, but we'll see what happens. Anyway, those are the main 4 factions of the island, and kind of how I'm going to try to make them a little more multidimensional and interesting. The next group to talk about, this is the secret faction, the Kopru. The Kopru, they're 8 hit dice. They're pretty powerful. And you can see that they're big amphibious creatures, but they've got like some freaky mind powers. In fact, well, first let's talk about where they are. before we take a look at their freaky mind powers. They live in the central plateau. The place that the players can encounter some of them is underneath an island in the center of the central plateau beneath the ruined city in a geothermal cave, basking in the heat. I think I saw a YouTuber, Seth Sarkowski, talk about, oh, wouldn't it be cool if why the Kopru are there is that this is the only way their eggs hatch. So I love that idea. Definitely going to borrow that and stick a whole bunch of Kopru eggs in this geothermal cave that has like hot sulfur pools and geysers and stuff like that. And I imagine that there's a lot more of the geothermal instability in the north part of the island where the dinosaurs are, which gives us more reasons to have like Kopru north of the mountains as well. But let's take a look at that freaky special ability. So in the last paragraph here, I don't know, it's probably hard to read, but they've got this charm ability that if you fail it, you become obedient to their mental commands. It doesn't matter how far away you are, they can still send mental commands. They know all the thoughts and memories of the charmed character. It gives you the ability to have someone like fall under the Kopru whammy and go home and start living a normal life. But the whole time that they're doing things, they are actually an agent of the Kopru, and they're trying to maneuver the world to benefit the Kopru, whatever that is. I think that's really interesting. And it gets even better when you consider that one of the items that they could create is a Kopru cursed idol. So we meet one of these cursed idols in the dungeon. This isn't, by the way, not a Kopru cursed idol. It's Tlaloc, an Aztec deity. But I saw it and said, you know what? I could picture maybe an artist working with me to create this into a Kopru cursed idol. And it's the kind of thing that you could find in the jungle ruins. There could be giant versions of these covered with vines in the ruins. The villagers know about them, so they either cover them up or knock them over, because if they're enchanted, when someone is in the presence of a Kopru idol and they look at it, they can get affected just as if a Kopru looked at them and did their charm effect. So that's really horrifying, but also great for the dungeon master. Like you could imagine the pirate captain has one of those Kopru idols in his private chambers. And now all the pirates are like carving little Kopru necklaces for themselves and a Kopru totem on the ship. And suddenly they're all doing Kopru stuff because they've been co-opted. And if a Kopru takes over a player character, one of the things they probably want them to do is to go find one of those cursed idols and take it back to them to specularum and make sure it gets given to some high-ranking important person so that it slowly works its way into the possession of the Duke. Suddenly that becomes really interesting. The Kopru from their little steamy tropical island could be getting humans to fight each other by like mind controlling basically different leaders in an undetectable way. I actually imagine how cool would it be to have like a villain late in the campaign, someone like the Black Eagle Baron or Bargle the Infamous. The players finally defeat them and they find out that they were in possession of a Kopru idol all along. The player's like, no, that's why that guy was so crazy. So I think that the Kopru, like the nature of their mind control and the way they use these cursed idols, actually gives a lot of potential for them to be villains influencing like the human world. It's kind of like spy thrillers, the way you have sleeper agents. Are they a Kopru agent or not? Anyway, I find that really interesting. So that's how I'm looking to improve the Isle of Dread, starting with the plot hooks. I don't think just going on a goose chase for the potential to find treasure would be enough for my players, but I think they would do it along with kind of serving national interests, like if they made a deal with a powerful merchant group, or if it was going to help their renown with the Duke, go on a mission where they're exploring They're negotiating treaties or setting up a trade outpost and kind of protecting the Karamaikan interests against those other nations and doing some privateering or high seas piracy. I think that's going to be great fun. And then to add depth to the island, let's flesh out some of those factions, make them multi-dimensional, give them some objectives where the players can potentially partner with them, or at least have opportunities that will have them exploring other parts of the Isle of Dread. Like I said, I definitely want some reasons why they're going to go north of the mountains and potentially get chased by a Tyrannosaurus Rex. And in this way, the campaign, it becomes a source for lots of different mini adventures, like a real hex crawl. And then finally, we talked about the Kopru and how that mind control ability they have, and the fact that they can channel it through these cursed idols allows us to turn them into a menace that can extend back to the mainland. They can corrupt or co-opt people really far away. And, they're just interested in kind of getting those idols into the hands of the most powerful people they can. And then, I don't know, starting a war, something juicy. Okay, that's it. That's it for today. Thanks for making it this far. Please consider liking and subscribing. It does help my channel, especially if you appreciate this content. If you like TSR stuff from back in the 80s, or you're a modern person who likes ShadowDark, I try to talk about all that stuff here. If you've run the Isle of Dread in the past, hey, let me know what you did to try to improve it when you ran it. I'll link to the first video here as well that also talked about the Isle of Dread, but mainly in terms of the mechanics and converting it to ShadowDark. And I'll put links to some of these products down below if you're interested in them. I'm a big fan of the Isle of Dread and the Grand Duchy of Karameikos. Otherwise, thanks for being here. I'll see everyone next time.